Most people think getting rich takes a huge paycheck or a lucky break. It doesn't. One quiet financial idea has built more fortunes than almost anything else out there, and yet most people hear the term compound interest and completely tune out. By the end of this video, you're going to understand it better than almost everyone around you, and that alone changes everything. Here's the whole idea in one breath. Compound interest is what happens when your money starts earning money on the money it already earned. That's it. No formula is required to understand the concept itself. Picture someone depositing $100 into a savings account. With simple interest, that person only ever earns a return on the original $100 year after year, forever. But with compound interest, once the first bit of interest gets added, the account now earns a return on that new, slightly larger number too. A dollar sitting in a drawer stays exactly $1 forever. A dollar invested somewhere that compounds starts quietly multiplying itself without anyone lifting a finger. And once that idea clicks, a completely different question starts to matter more than any of it. Line up two people side by side, each with $10,000. One earns simple interest, the other earns compound interest at the exact same rate. For the first several years, their balances barely look different. A few dollars apart, nothing dramatic. Simple interest grows in a straight line, like someone adding the same fixed amount to a jar every single year without fail. Compound interest, on the other hand, curves upward, adding a little more each year than the year before it. Give it 5 years, and the gap is small enough to shrug off. Give it 25 years, and the person earning compound interest has pulled dramatically ahead, sometimes by tens of thousands of dollars. Small, boring differences early on tend to hide something much bigger waiting further down the road. Somebody opens a brokerage account, drops in a few $100s a month, and checks the balance 3 months later, expecting to see something impressive. Instead, it looks almost identical to what they put in. That moment right there is where most people quietly lose faith. Here's the part nobody explains clearly enough. In the early years, almost all of the visible growth comes from the money someone is personally adding, not from interest doing any heavy lifting yet. The interest is technically working, just far too slowly to notice on a phone screen. A lot of beginners walk away right here, convinced the whole thing doesn't work for people like them. But patience isn't just a nice personality trait in this situation. It's the actual mechanism that makes everything that comes later even possible. Picture a tiny snowball at the top of a snowy hill, barely bigger than a golf ball. Someone gives it a push, and for the first few rotations, almost nothing happens. It just wobbles forward, gathering a thin layer of snow nobody would even notice. But every rotation after that picks up a little more than the last one did because there's simply more surface area to grab onto. By the time it reaches the bottom of the hill, that tiny starting ball has turned into something enormous, moving faster than it ever did at the top. Compound interest behaves the exact same way. The first few years feel like that slow wobble near the top of the hill. But given enough time and distance, growth stops being gradual and starts becoming dramatic. And that shift depends on a few specific factors worth understanding clearly. Strip away all the complexity, and compound growth really only answers to 3 things: how much time the money has to grow, what rate of return it earns, and how consistently new money gets added along the way. Of these 3, time carries more weight than most people realize. A modest rate of return given several extra decades can outperform an aggressive rate of return given only a handful of years. That's simply how the math behaves. A commercial fisherman who starts investing small amounts in his 20s is working with a variable none of his coworkers can buy back later, no matter how much money they eventually earn. Time isn't just one ingredient among 3. It's the one ingredient nobody can purchase more of once it's gone. Take 2 people. One starts investing $200 a month at age 25. The other waits until 35, then invests $400 a month. Double the contribution, trying to make up for lost time. Run the math out to retirement age, assuming a reasonable rate of return, and the first person often ends up with more money in the end, despite contributing less overall across their lifetime. That result surprises almost everyone hearing it for the first time. The 10-year head start did something the extra money later simply couldn't replicate. It gave compounding a full decade of extra rotations before the second person even got started. Money can always be earned again. Promotions happen, side gigs come along, raises show up eventually. Time spent waiting, though, is the one resource that never comes back around a second time. Waiting for the right time tops the list, and it's a trap almost everyone falls into at some point. There's always a reason it feels premature. A slow month at work, an upcoming expense, a market that seems a little shaky right now. Some people only invest whatever happens to be left over after every other expense gets covered, which usually means nothing gets invested at all most months. Others chase whatever investment posted the highest return last year, jumping around instead of staying consistent with one approach. And here's an uncomfortable one worth saying directly. Pulling money out early to cover a want, not a need, quietly resets years of progress in a single afternoon. None of these mistakes feel dramatic in the moment they happen. They just quietly cost the exact thing compound interest depends on most. This isn't some rare mechanism locked away for financial experts. A basic savings account uses it. A high-yield savings account uses it more aggressively. Government and corporate bonds use it. So do index funds, retirement accounts, and dividend-paying stocks that automatically reinvest their payouts. A rideshare driver setting aside part of every week's earnings into an employer-sponsored retirement account is using the exact same principle as someone with a financial advisor managing a much larger portfolio. The tool doesn't require permission, a special account type, or a minimum income to start using. What changes from person to person isn't access. It's whether the account actually gets funded consistently and left alone long enough to do its job. And there's one milestone in particular that tends to test that patience more than any other. There's a well-known idea floating around personal finance circles. The first $100,000 is the hardest money anyone will ever save, and pretty much everyone who's reached it agrees. Early on, almost every dollar of that balance comes directly from someone's own paycheck. The interest contributes something, technically, but it's small enough to feel almost irrelevant compared to the effort of the contributions themselves. Once that milestone gets crossed, though, something shifts. The interest generated each year starts pulling real weight, sometimes rivaling or even outpacing what a person is manually contributing. The next $100,000 often arrives noticeably faster than the first one did, not because anyone worked harder, but because the money itself finally started working too. That first stretch tests patience more than any other part of the journey, but it's also the part that makes everything after it possible. Speeding up compound growth doesn't require a complicated strategy. It mostly requires consistency, treated like a non-negotiable habit, the same way someone treats a monthly car payment or a phone bill. Reinvesting every dividend and every bit of interest instead of cashing it out keeps the snowball rolling without interruption. Increasing contributions whenever income goes up, even by a small percentage, adds fuel without requiring a lifestyle overhaul. Here's the part that trips people up most: staying invested during a market downturn instead of pulling everything out in a panic. A warehouse supervisor who kept contributing through a rough stretch in the market often ends up better off than someone who stopped, waited for things to calm down, and missed the recovery entirely. None of this is glamorous. It's just repetition, applied patiently, over a long enough stretch of time. It's rarely one dramatic decision that keeps someone from experiencing real compound growth. It's usually a slow drift, contributions that quietly stop during a tight month and never quite start back up again. Some people spend the extra money instead of investing it, telling themselves they'll catch up later once things settle down. Others panic the moment the market dips, selling at exactly the wrong time and locking in a loss that never had to happen. And here's the biggest miscalculation of all. Most people badly underestimate what the next 10 or 20 years could actually look like if nothing got interrupted along the way. The account someone imagines having at retirement and the account they'd actually end up with left alone are usually further apart than they think. In a good way. Nobody needs several $1,000s sitting around to get started. A part-time barista setting aside $25 a week is doing something that matters more over time than someone waiting until they have enough to make it worthwhile. Small, consistent amounts beat large, occasional ones almost every single time, simply because consistency is what compounding actually depends on. Waiting for the perfect moment doesn't protect anyone. It just quietly hands over the one resource that can't be replaced later. The hardest part was never really the investing itself. Opening the account, choosing the fund, setting up the transfer, None of that takes more than an afternoon. The hardest part is deciding today is the day, instead of pushing it into some vague version of eventually that never quite seems to arrive on its own. Every single wealthy investor, without exception, started with a first dollar that felt small and unremarkable at the time. Nobody skipped that part. Nobody found a shortcut around it. Compound interest isn't a trick, a secret, or something reserved for people with a finance degree hanging on their wall. It's simply the process of giving money enough time to grow on its own, quietly, without needing constant attention or perfect timing. The earlier someone begins, the less money they actually need to put in to reach the same result. That's not motivation talk. That's just how the math consistently plays out. As Benjamin Franklin once wrote, money is of a prolific nature. It can beget money, and its offspring can beget even more. That idea is nearly 300 years old, and it's never once stopped being true. If this video finally made compound interest click for you, do one simple thing before you go. Hit follow. It doesn't cost anything, and it's the easiest way to make sure videos like this one keep showing up when you need them. Now here's the real question, and it's worth being honest about. What's actually been stopping you from starting? Not enough money? Waiting for the right time? Not knowing where to begin? Drop your answer in the comments below. Someone reading it might be sitting on the exact same excuse, waiting for a reason to finally let it go.